It's no secret that Brewmaster is struggling in Mythic Plus, from lack of utility to seemingly useless defensives, to a lot more attention required from the healer. This tank needs some serious help. So in this video, I wanted to present a wish list, if you will. These are the things I would love to see being changed or added to the Brewmaster monk in a future patch. Quick disclaimer, this video is just for fun. I understand Brewmaster can be played at a very high level, and it's very good in Raid regardless of Mythic Plus tuning, and Stagger is obviously a very niche thing to tune properly. With that out of the way though, let's dive in. I've been a diehard Brewmaster main for the last 3 years or so, and while not the longest standing Brewmaster dedicated player, I'm definitely passionate about the class. I've overall enjoyed my War Within experience because while not the strongest tank in keys and quite far from it, I at least feel strong in the raid setting. Going into this expansion, we saw a plethora of tank nerfs as Blizzard implemented a new philosophy shift in tank survivability, attempting to create a more cohesive environment between tanks, healers, and DPS. Brewmaster saw a series of nerfs, similar to other tanks, but for us, some of the larger nerfs came in the form of Celestial Brew and Celestial Fortune changes alongside other minor adjustments. The Celestial Brew nerf felt a little excessive because it was coming off the back of the main stat and secondary stats that we had coming out of Dragonflight and the effect of our Dragonflight tier set and how it impacted the class. This inadvertently hurt our secondary stat priority because Celestial Brew scales directly with attack power, which comes from our mastery, therefore making it less effective. Stagger is also an extremely niche game mechanic, and I could only imagine it's an absolute nightmare to tune. We live or die quite literally based on this tuning. Brewmaster scales extremely well with the main stat and with item level, but because of this, if we ever get buffed during one patch, most likely we're going to be nerfed the next. This revolving door philosophy has left Brewmasters feeling shorthanded, which is a shame because it's an insanely fun spec to play. Anyways, a few small changes I would like to see going into the near future would be a reversion to the Celestial Brew nerfs. This would give Brewmaster a slight boost in survivability and making mastery feel a little bit more impactful, but it's not going to be game breaking. A small buff to Elixir of Determination would also suffice. This talent was introduced in the War Within, and during beta testing it proved to be way too powerful, typically being 25 upwards of 50% of our overall healing. This talent was nerfed twice, reducing its total effectiveness in the ballpark of about like 70%, but a small buff to this talent would help the Brewmaster feel a little bit more stable in high Mythic Plus. My one last suggestion would be a small buff to our health pool, but I don't believe that this can be just a flat health increase though, but it can be implemented via talents, which we're going to explore momentarily. Before we jump into that though, I'm going to be diving into my talent suggestions to improve our survivability and to address both the dead and ghost talent nodes, but first I want to briefly talk about Mythic Plus utility. In terms of utility, I feel like Brewmaster lacks what other tanks possess. I'm not advocating to homogenize tank kits in any means, but I do think we need something that sets us apart. While Leg Sweep is extremely powerful, it does compete with all other group stuns and is affected heavily by diminishing returns, because there are a ton of stuns in the game, like Shockwave to Incap Totem, to Shadow Fury, to Chaos Nova. There are a bunch of single target stuns as well, like Stormbolt, Fell Eruption, Intimidate, Hammer of Justice, and the list goes kind of on and on. This really hurts the value of Leg Sweep since stuns no longer cause enemy casts to go on CD like we've seen in previous expansions. So because of this, one of our strongest utility spells were actually hurt in generalized group content. Now I will say Ring of Peace is extremely powerful, but it's extremely niche. It can be used to stop spells, group mobs, or to even kite, but I believe Blizzard can make this spell a little bit more competitive, and here's my suggestion. First, remove Song of Chi-Ji. Along with this, remove Peace and Prosperity, and make it a choice node. I believe the first option in the choice node should be a second charge of Ring of Peace, and the other choice being a Ring of Peace interaction change that no longer knocks mobs, but silences mobs within its radius while increasing its radius by 2 yards. Having a second charge with a slightly reduced cooldown would allow for some pretty interesting plays. You can pin mobs up between 2 rings, or the Brewmaster can use them to knock casts or kite more frequently. On the other hand, with the other choice node, you can now blanket silence mob for 8 seconds, which forces mobs to engage in hand-to-hand combat with a martial arts specialist, which is both thematic, but also very strong for the current design of Mythic Plus. This obviously will give other monk specs as well some pretty cool utility, which is a bonus, so basically make monk great again. With utility out of the way, let's get to the meat of what this video is meant to be, a dissection of our current spec tree. I want to address talents that are arguably unplayable or utterly useless, and suggest some changes or additions that could help. So first things first, let's start with Staggering Strikes. This is a horrible talent for multiple reasons. The competitive talent in this row is Quicksip, which just vastly outperforms this talent very early on in any type of key progression. Then, because of its flat damage amount, it does not scale into high enough content, since 68k, for example, is always going to be 68k, but a 5% will scale naturally with the difficulty of the content you're in. Also, with where it's placed in the tree, players just path around it 100% of the time. It was a cool effect back in BFA, but no longer has a place in this tree with the other talents it's competing with. Now we're going to jump around a little bit here. We're going to jump all the way to the bottom of the tree with Heightened Guard and Ox Stance, and specifically Black Ox Adept. There's almost no world where you need more Ox Stance charges than what we're currently getting passively. Black Ox Adept as a talent is basically dead in the water and should be removed. I have a cool idea that I'm going to get to in a short bit, but I want to break down the rest of the dead talents first. Brewmaster has seen some excellent changes over the last 2 years ever since the introduction of the new talent tree, but ever since we've introduced both Shado-pan and Master of Harmony, there has been a talent that was rendered almost unplayable. I was always a massive fan of Press the Advantage when it was first introduced. This shares a node currently with Weapons of Order, and back in Dragonflight, there was an outrageous amount of active buttons for the Brewmaster spec, and this was a competitive choice that removed Tiger Palm from our kit and gave our auto attacks a ramping flat damage buff to all of our other abilities. While I was never someone who had any disdain towards the complicated rotation, I still valued the attempt to make the class easier for newcomers. Going into the War Within though, the button bloat issue was addressed, but the hero talents made Tiger Palm a very strong button, even in AoE due to Master of Harmony talent, Overwhelming Force, actively harming Press the Advantage, and on the other hand, Shado-pan offers cooldown reduction on Weapons of Order but has no interaction with Press the Advantage, which also renders it arguably unplayable. As long as both of these hero talents remain in their current state, Press the Advantage will be nothing more than a ghost node. I don't advocate for Press the Advantage to be removed. I strongly suggest granting bonuses to players who play Press the Advantage. For example, if you're playing Master of Harmony, your auto attacks should provide Overwhelming Force damage, maybe even if it's at a nerfed rate since it's based off of auto attacks versus Tiger Palm. For Shado-pan, I think the talent Efficient Trading could provide an additional stack of Press the Advantage for every 50 or 100 amount of energy spent. Obviously, there might be some tuning involved here, but either way, I think either of these changes could allow Press the Advantage to be competitive once again, while still making Weapons of Order strong. Speaking of useless talents, so let's talk about Nizao the Black Ox. I have 2 requests mainly for this, which I think one is more likely to happen than the other. So first, I recommend combining all of these nodes into one. The Black Ox itself is easily one of the worst clones in the game, and it's a shell of its Shadowlands former self. Providing more power into the ability without having to spend 4 talent points will make this just more attractive to players in general. My second request is to actually remove it from our tree and making a baseline talent. No need to take up multiple slots in the tree, especially if there's so many other great options that we could add, which, actually speaking of which, let's explore. If I'm crying for talents to be removed, it's only right that I offer replacements, right? Again, this is just for fun, and it's a little theory crafting, if you will. Let's start with Nizao. In this scenario, let's say we're keeping the talent in the tree, but we're going to combine all of the effects into one talent because it would just actually make it maybe a option that we would take. What I would do is I would actually shift this up and take the place of Elixir of Determination, and this will allow players to opt not to take it if they don't want to, because they can simply put the point into Quicksip. Elixir of Determination would then shift over and take the spot of Zen Meditation, and Zen Meditation would then find a home in the center of the tree where the Nizao talent currently resides. And here is where I'd like to petition for the reintroduction of Fundamental Observation. This was originally a Legion legendary that had been watered down into a version in Dragonflight. I'd like to see the return of the legendary because it provides a Brewmaster with an actual valuable defensive in Mythic Plus. The original Fundamental Observation gave Zen Meditation a 50% reduced cooldown, which knocks it from a 5-minute cooldown all the way down to a staggering 2.5-minute cooldown, and allowed the Brewmasters to move during the channel, and it wouldn't cancel upon being auto-attacked. Similar to other things like Netherwalk or Turtle, not being able to attack during the channel is the downside, but at least you have a short cooldown, a big DR that doesn't get canceled upon a single auto attack. Unfortunately, this ended up becoming a PvP talent with Guided Meditation, but who cares about PvP? This is a sick legendary, and I hope they put it back in the tree. And okay, let's shift back up to the Staggering Strikes. I think we should remove this, period, and we should replace it with our current tier set. First season of the War Within tier set had an insanely fluid tier set bonus, granting our Blackout Kick a 33% chance to refund a Keg Smash charge and make it free. This has been a game-changing tier set, and I applaud whichever dev or intern came up with the idea. But it's been so impactful that I really can't imagine a world now where we don't have this tier set. And of course, we can't talk about tier sets without bringing up Keg of the Heavens. This was a Shadowlands tier set that caused our Keg Smash damage to deal 50% more damage, heal the Brewmaster for 66% of the damage dealt, and grant a health increase based on 66% of the damage dealt. Now, of course, there might be some tuning that needs to happen here because this large of an increase to Keg Smash on top of the other modifiers like the Shado-pan traits as well as Scalding Brew would make it insanely overpowered. But I think with the proper tuning, this would solve a lot of issues that I've been referring to my concerns about tank sustainability and temporary health increase. If I would suggest a place for this, I would actually put it right here underneath the Zen Med talents. But with this, I would actually shift the pathing slightly by flipping these arrows around. By doing so, players can play through Zen Med talents or play around this while still being able to grab Keg of the Heavens and navigating around elusive footwork if desired. Here's my last little cook, which actually took more brain cells than I really have to come up with, that definitely has some issues, but bear with me. Let me introduce you to this totally hypothetical made-up capstone talent called Endless Elixir. Whenever the Brewmaster consumes a charge of Oxdance, gain Endless Elixir, granting a brew at 50% effectiveness. This would include Fortifying Brew and Celestial Brew. Now, what I really like about this is that it creates a pretty solid damage increase through the additional brews proccing from Special Delivery and a survivability increase through Absorbs and increased health through Fortifying Brew or Celestial Brew. I was thinking that it could also proc Purifying Brew or even Black Ox Brew, but I think this would be a little bit more complicated. It would be pretty cool to see random purifies, but it would reduce stagger by 25% instead of 50%, but this would have a really cool interaction with both Special Delivery and Guy Plim's Imperial Brew. Now, Black Ox Brew at 50% effectiveness is a little strange because it grants so many benefits like energy refill, purifying charges back, and Celestial Brew refund, but I think there could be a cool way to at least introduce Celestial Brew and Fortifying Brew. Now, again, this is a total hypothetical talent, clearly has issues, but let me know what you guys think. Now, I think this would replace the Black Ox Adept at the bottom of the tree that I talked about earlier, making Oxdance as well as this area of the capstone a little bit more competitive than it currently is. While doing the little bit of research that went into making this video, I wanted to include a couple of honorable mentions because there are some cool effects that used to exist through previous expansions and borrowed power systems or PvP talents that I think could make for some pretty awesome options in Mythic Plus. Back in Legion, there was a legendary called Firestone Walkers, which caused your Breath of Fire to give you further cooldown reduction on Fortifying Brew. Fortifying Brew is often seen as a pretty weak talent and defensive, but additional cooldown reduction and paired with the right choice nodes would make this type of talent really impactful in Mythic Plus. Now, if we take a look at PvP talents, for example, Brew has a really cool talent called Eerie Fermentation, which grants the Brewmaster movement speed and magical damage reduction based on their current level of stagger. This gives fairly similar vibes to things like High Tolerance, Training of Nizao, and Flow of Chi, granting Brewmaster who dabbles in high stagger or low health to have an extra line of defense. Speaking of PvP talents, there's another one that I think could be pretty solid, which is called Avert Harm. This allows for the Brewmaster to absorb incoming damage on their party and stagger it. This could be a pretty solid group defensive, as we already see a ton of other tanks providing group defensives through abilities like Intervene, Darkness, Rallying Cry, Blessings, Anti-Magic Zone, etc. In PvP, it's a pretty short cooldown, but I think making this ability like a 2-minute CD for Brew and PvE content could give Brewmaster a slight edge. Last but not least, there's a tier set bonus from Hellfire Citadel called Hurricane's Eye. Similar to the Firestone Walkers that I previously mentioned, this gives Brewmasters cooldown reduction on their brews based on consuming their healing spheres. Any and all cooldown reduction abilities are typically very well received, and I think generally good game design, and players tend to enjoy them as long as they're relatively consistent. We've seen this with sigil reductions and, the previous expansion. We see this with incarnation reduction through Guardian of Ursoc, anger management on the warrior, or even the wings and the other cooldown reductions through Protection Paladin. Any talents that give us uptime on Fortifying Brew would make the cooldown a little less shit. Anyways, that's the video. To quickly recap, I think some quick changes that Blizzard could implement is reverting Celestial Brew, giving us a buff to Elixir of Determination, and figuring out some type of way to implement an additional health increase. And of course, going into the next patch, I think this tier set has been game breaking, and I'd like to see it continue in a form of a talent. Outside of that, everything else I suggested is kind of really reaching for the stars, and I just felt like having a little bit of fun with this video. Anyways, let me know what you guys think down below, which of my opinions is completely wrong, and which retired powers would you like to see return for the Brewmaster. Also, let me know how great your alt protection warrior is doing in keys versus any Brewmaster player ever. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and a special thanks to my Patreon members. Without you guys, I really couldn't make content like this. I hope you're all staying happy, healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace.